Go ahead and jump. Maxwell, jump. Go ahead and jump.
This evening at 7, following the Victory Garden.
Some of the world's great voices are celebrating Rossini's 200th birthday. Join Marilyn Horne, Frederica von Stade, June Anderson, Samuel Ramey, Thomas Hampson, Rockwell Blake, Chris Merritt, and others next time on Live from Lincoln Center.
Enjoy this special program this evening at 8, following an evening of championship skating.
TV worth watching expands your world. See the world during Festival, March 8th through the 22nd on Iowa Public Television, a resource for Iowa's future. Join us 1 week from tonight for more TV worth watching during Festival. Next Wednesday at 7, expand your world to Hawaii and join conservationists in their efforts to preserve its natural wonders. Then, lift your spirits with music and dance from a big band ballroom bash. Later, see the stars as we bring you the best of the Princess Trust rock concerts. Enjoy it all 1 week from tonight during Festival on Iowa Public Television, a resource for Iowa's future. Iowa Public Television.
TV worth watching. IPTV.
Acquisition of this program was made possible by Friends of Iowa Public Television. And funding for the Iowa broadcast is provided by Luther College in Decorah, Iowa, since 1861, an environment for academic excellence. And by CRST, a family-owned company based in Iowa and a major truck carrier in the United States, which is proud to support the MacNeil Lehrer Newshour.
Good evening. I'm Jim Lehrer in Washington.
And I'm Charlene Hunter-Gault in New York. After the news summary, politics is our lead focus. We examine the results of Mini Tuesday. Next, we have a report on a promising cancer treatment that's in short supply. And finally, correspondent Jeffrey Kay looks at why some scientists are combing the sky for killer asteroids.
Funding for the MacNeil Lehrer Newshour has been provided by PepsiCo. PepsiCo. Part of helping the world live and communicate better is keeping it well informed. That's why funding for the NewsHour is also provided by AT&T and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and viewers like you.
There were many declarations of victory after yesterday's primaries and caucuses. They came from Democrats, Paul Tsongas, who won a primary in Maryland, caucuses in Washington State and Utah. Bill Clinton, who won the Georgia primary, Tom Harkin, who won a caucus in Idaho, a straw poll in Minnesota, and Jerry Brown, who won the Colorado primary. He spoke today in Las Vegas, Nevada.
Every night the media paid attention to the other candidates. The local papers and television began to cover my campaign the last few days, but the national media just utterly focused on those people, and that gave them an enormous advantage that the people overcame. They saw through the barrage of propaganda, and they chose our cause, we the people. It's very impressive.
Of the 5 leading Democratic candidates, only Bob Kerrey came away with no first-place finish. He canceled all scheduled appearances and returned to Washington today. Staff members said he was reassessing his candidacy. He plans a news conference tomorrow morning. President Bush won all 3 of yesterday's Republican primaries, Maryland, Georgia, and Colorado. His challenger, Pat Buchanan, got at least 30% of the vote in each. Buchanan had this to say in Baton Rouge, Louisiana today.
Yesterday, we won a tremendous victory, my friends, over there in the Peach State of Georgia. A tremendous victory. It came 2 weeks after New Hampshire, and what makes it so important is that New Hampshire, The Bush folks told us, and they told the country, don't worry about it. Pat Buchanan snuck up on us. He had 10 weeks up there. They got a major recession or depression up there. Voters were angry. We didn't get up there enough. We didn't use any of our clever attack ads, and that's how he got 37% of the vote. Well, yesterday, my friends, in Georgia, I didn't have 10 weeks to campaign. I had 5 days.
Buchanan called for the president to drop out of the race. White House spokesman Marlin Fitzwater responded by saying Buchanan has gone Looney Tunes on us. Mr. Bush campaigned in Florida today in anticipation of next week's primary there and 10 other states. He commented on yesterday's results as he left the White House this morning.
We're doing well. We've won everything. We're going to keep on winning everything. Tough times out there, and I think people are beginning to understand that what counts is who wins these primaries. So I feel good about it, and I'm not going to keep raising the high bar. I'm just going to go one at a time and win them all and win the election in the fall.
Do you accept the votes against for Buchanan as votes against you?
It seems to be that way, yes. I think that's a good way to analyze it. And but that'll turn around. The economy will turn around. We'll make some headway with Congress eventually. We'll keep trying. And people will see that I'm the person to lead this country, just now as I was in the past.
We'll have full analysis of all of this right after the news summary. Charlene?
In economic news, factory orders rose 0.4% in January. The increase was the third in 4 months, but well short of what economists had been expecting. The Commerce Department said much of the gain came from increased demand for industrial machinery, computers, and other big-ticket items.
Arab and Israeli negotiators concluded the latest round of peace talks in Washington today. They did so with no agreements. Israel offered a plan for limited Palestinian self-rule, which the Palestinians rejected. Israel rejected a Palestinian proposal for elections in the occupied territories because they said it amounted to statehood for the Palestinians. This afternoon, Palestinian spokeswoman Hanan Hasrawi said her side would not wait for Israeli approval before holding elections. A court in Algeria today banned the country's Islamic fundamentalist party and ordered it dissolved. The decision came 2 months after the government canceled parliamentary elections to prevent an almost certain fundamentalist victory. Nearly all the party's leaders and about 5,000 of its supporters have since been jailed.
As many as 300 people have died in an explosion at a coal mine in Turkey. About 700 miners were underground when the blast occurred last night. 400 escaped. The others were trapped underground. David Chater of Independent Television News reports.
Miners who managed to escape the blast said they ran through passages that were full of bodies. Today at the pithead, the rescue teams emerged carrying only the dead. There's little hope now that any of those missing underground could still be alive. Most of the victims appear to have been asphyxiated by the clouds of carbon monoxide and dust that bellowed through the mine shafts after the explosion. Rescue teams have been faced with fierce fires burning out of control underground. They've not been able to reach the deepest sections of the mine. The miners' families crowded round the pithead through the night and today, keeping an increasingly hopeless vigil. Miners have protested in the past about inadequate safety measures and outdated equipment. Nearly 100 survivors were taken to the local hospitals, most of them suffering from severe burns. The disaster looks set to be the worst ever suffered by the mining industry in Turkey. The death toll could climb to more than 300.
Russian officials today said they were tightening regulations on nuclear safety to prevent another Chernobyl disaster. The announcement came only hours after a fire forced the shutdown of a nuclear reactor in southern Russia. The officials said no radiation was released.
Russian President Boris Yeltsin today called for peace talks between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The two republics have been fighting a 4-year-old undeclared war over territory. Azerbaijani officials today said they had recovered the bodies of 120 people massacred in the disputed region. They accused former Soviet troops of helping Armenian militants carry out those killings. Armenian officials accused Azerbaijani forces of shooting down a helicopter. They said 6 people were killed, 32 injured in the Tuesday attack. The helicopter was reportedly evacuating civilians from the region. Cuba will not cooperate with the United Nations investigation of alleged human rights abuses in Cuba. The UN Human Rights Commission voted yesterday in Geneva to launch such an investigation. An official government statement in Havana today said that vote was the result of manipulations and blackmail by the United States, and Cuba would not cooperate.
Stage and film actress Sandy Dennis has died at the age of 54. She was perhaps best known for her Academy Award-winning performance as a young faculty wife in the 1966 movie Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which also starred Richard Burton. Dennis died Monday at her home in Connecticut after a 2.5-year battle with ovarian cancer. That's it for the news summary. Just ahead, win, place, and show in yesterday's political races, a tree that grows hope, and a celestial alert. Campaign 92 is up first tonight. Before we get to some political analysis, a quick review of the winners and losers in the 7 states up for grabs in yesterday's presidential primaries and caucuses. President Bush won all 3 Republican primaries despite a strong showing from challenger Patrick Buchanan. In Colorado, Bush received 67% to Buchanan's 30%. In Georgia, Bush won 64% to Buchanan's 36%. In Maryland, the president beat Buchanan 70 to 30%. On the Democratic side, Jerry Brown won his first primary in Colorado with 29%. Bill Clinton had 27%. Paul Tsongas 26%. Bob Kerrey and Tom Harkin finished further back. In Georgia, Bill Clinton took home his first win with 57%. Tsongas had 24%, and the rest were far behind. Maryland gave Paul Tsongas a clear victory with 41% to Clinton's 34%. Tom Harkin did well in some state caucuses, winning the largest percent of delegates at stake in Idaho. He also won a straw poll conducted at selected caucuses in Minnesota. Tsongas was the clear winner in Utah's caucuses. Results are still not final in the Washington state's caucuses, but according to the Associated Press, Paul Tsongas appears to be leading there. Jim?
Now a sorting out of yesterday's results. Gergen and Shields are here. David Gergen is editor-at-large of U.S. News and World Report. He's in Dallas tonight. Mark Shields is a syndicated columnist. He is in Washington with Democratic pollster Peter Hart, Republican campaign strategist Ed Rollins, and Eddie Williams, head of the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, a nonpartisan research organization which focuses on black policy issues. Gentlemen, let's begin with the big questions. First, what did yesterday say about the political health of George Bush, Mark?
I think it said about George Bush that it's time to recognize that George Bush is a man of his word. I mean, he said to David Frost that he would do what was ever necessary in order to win re-election. And he has moved right faster than a military junta in Latin America. He's over there, and it just shows his resiliency. I think he's somebody that I think is going to win his party's nomination, but has a very serious problem.
What is that problem?
The problem is that Pat Buchanan is winning. It's more than simply a protest. Pat Buchanan is winning those very votes in the Republican president that Ronald Reagan had in his back pocket. Democratic voters who vote in Republican primaries, independents. Buchanan is winning those and splitting them with Bush, and that's going to be a problem for George Bush in the fall.
You agree, Ed Rollins, that the president has a serious problem, period, and a serious problem as delineated by Mr. Shields?
I don't think Pat Buchanan is his problem. I think his problem is literally 25 to 30% of his own party today, for economic reasons or whatever, aren't voting for him, and somehow he has to get those voters back. The coalition of the 80s probably is no longer there. The blue-collar Democrat will be much more difficult to get this time, but you've got to get your Republican base back. And equally as important, when you look at the breakdown, young men are voting in disproportionate roles for Buchanan, and they may be more difficult to get back than just the ordinary Republican voter.
David, in Dallas, explain to the non-political experts why a 7-30 victory, say, is a defeat for the guy who got 70%.
Well, it's a defeat for 2 reasons, Jim, I think. One is that the sitting president shouldn't be faced with a loss of 30% on a consistent basis. as the president now finds himself doing as he goes across these primaries. Secondly, it's also true, Jim, and I think we in the media, and in particular the Bush campaign, is letting Pat Buchanan define what victory is. So that as long as Pat can go out and claim that he wins when he gets only 30% of the votes, and that's given a lot of attention and publicity, he can continue to do pretty well. But can I add one thing to what Ed Rollins just said? Because I think he was absolutely on point. I think that is the central problem for the presidency, but I would be interested in knowing whether Ed and others there think there is a second problem developing for him, and that is as he moves to try to recapture some of that Republican base, whether he appears to be pandering or whether he appears to be weak. The statement in the last 48 hours that he made a mistake on the tax issue, it did not seem to be made for policy reasons. It seemed to be made entirely for political reasons in order to throw a bone to the right. And I think probably while the right may have welcomed it, I would imagine there are a lot of other people in this country who would think, good grief, what does he believe in? Where is his core belief? Did he not think it was a good idea? If he didn't think it was a good idea, why did he do it? If he thought it was a mistake, why does he only admit it now under the heat of a Buchanan attack?
Eddie Williams, how would you analyze the president's problem based on the results of yesterday?
Well, Jim, I don't think Pat Buchanan can deal a mortal blow to President Bush, but I think what he is doing is wearing away some of his Teflon, if any is there, or wearing away some of his armor that will indeed make him more vulnerable in the general election, whether it is the perception of him pandering or whether it is...
Do you agree there may be some
I think
truth in what David is saying?
I think so. I think so. Absolutely.
Yeah. Peter Hart?
I'll pick up where David is, and that is he lacks consistency. Every day there's a new plan coming from President Bush. There's no sense of a vision. There's no sense of the core beliefs. And in the end, that's what the voters are going to judge on. And they look, and you can see the piece that you had at the top of the hour. This is a person that seems to be floundering around rather than a person that's in control of his destiny. The other point that Ed Rollins made, and I think it's an important one, that is that it was the female vote that saved the president. But if you look at all the polls in the fall, he has big trouble with the women's vote. So he now has trouble with younger male vote in the Republican primary, and we know in the general election with female vote. There's not going to be a lot left, which means he's going to have to go tactical in terms of how he's going to run the race from here on out.
You, Eddie Williams, you would not write him off at this point, would you not?
President Bush?
President Bush.
No way, no way. He's going to be on the Republican ticket. In terms of the general election, I think we have to make a lot of assumptions about who he will face. I think he will be wounded and vulnerable. The question is whether the Democratic Party will have a candidate that can topple him.
And Rollins, what about Pat Buchanan? Where does he sit now? I mean, nobody gives him a chance of getting the nomination. So what is his mission from this point on?
Well, I think one thing that's very important for the White House, for the Bush campaign, and for everyone else to understand is Pat Buchanan's not going to play by anybody's rules. He's not been a partisan Republican. He's been a partisan conservative who happens to have worked for some Republicans. And to think that he's going to drop out of this race in 2 or 3 weeks because he's not getting a sufficient number of delegates is absurd. This is a guy who has very deep beliefs, and they may be out of tune with an awful lot of Americans, but he's running for 1996. I think in his heart and soul, he doesn't care if George Bush loses in 1992, and that's the great danger. He is in a guerrilla warfare type of a campaign, and he's going to stay in this race. He's going to have supporters who are going to stay with him, and obviously he's not going to basically go play normal political games at the convention.
Mark Shields, Charles Krauthammer said it in very graphic terms in a column in the Washington Post on Sunday. He said Pat Buchanan is a fascist. That was the word that he used. Now, can he stay in a campaign with that kind of snowball anti-Buchanan rhetoric right after him?
The anti-Buchanan rhetoric has been present since the beginning of his candidacy. I don't think that Charles Krauthammer's column is going to get Pat Buchanan out of the race. I think, or is going to affect Pat Buchanan's
so you agree with that?
Support. I think that, it's interesting how the Bush campaign ran against Buchanan in Georgia. They accused him of being insufficiently sensitive on feminist issues and insufficiently bellicose in the Persian Gulf. That's hardly, and I think Peter's right, those are tactical decisions they're making to run against Pat Buchanan. There is no strategic message that George Bush, nobody has any idea really about, we just defined what the first Bush term was going to be about in his State of the Union in 1992, and nobody has any idea what the second Bush term is going to be about.
David Gergen, what should the president do about Buchanan? Should he take him on head on? Should he go after some of these racial and other issues, or should he be president and do what Mark says? Talk about what he's going to do if he's reelected.
The first and the foremost thing he must do is to be president. He has to assert his authority over the economy and take credit for what could be a recovery that's budding now. That would help him politically, and I think that, frankly, it would help to restore some of his authority as president. I do think it would be helpful to have someone of some importance within the party to present a serious address about the nature of the Buchanan presidency, candidacy, and to call him on the degree to which he is now flirting with racism, that he's now flirting with this extremism, which I do believe is the dark side of conservatism. Bill Bennett, for example, has been arguing very, very persuasively. People like Bennett need to make some serious addresses, I think, that would help a lot. Thirdly, Jim, I would argue that that men like Ronald Reagan and perhaps Barry Goldwater and Nixon need to be assembled at some fairly early point to say, look, Pat, you're getting the 30%, but if you want to be serious in this party, if you want to join the party, in effect, to come back to Ed Rollins' point, if you want to be a future leader, you cannot spoil this one. You should get out if you can't win primaries on Super Tuesday.
Ed Rollins, you don't think that's going to happen?
Well, first I would argue that I don't think Pat's getting 30%. I mean, I would assume there's 30% voting against the president. He may be adding to that in some places and subtracting from it in other places. There's a certain segment of the Republican Party and some independents and some Democrats who've crossed over who want to send the president a message because they're unhappy with the economy. I think it's very, very important that this president be presidential, just as David said. He's a guy who's very comfortable as president, and he's very uncomfortable as a candidate. He's not been a very good candidate historically. And I think that he basically needs to go up to Camp David, take a weekend, figure out why he wants a second term, articulate that on a piece of paper, and come out and basically go out and tell the American public, this is what I'm going to do, measure me 5 years from now by what I've laid out here, and start running in the fall. Let the candidates who are going to have to fight Buchanan in 96, the Jack Kemps, the Bill Bennetts, the Pete DuPonts, go take him on now, just as David said, and the president ought to get above the fray and start talking to voters in the fall.
Peter Hart, have I missed it, or have the Republicans, the people that Ed Rollins has talked about, have they really taken on Pat Buchanan, or have I missed it?
I guess the problem is that George Bush just hasn't gotten the message. Every time he comes out of the gates at the White House and he says, I've gotten the message, he's telling you he hasn't gotten the message. And I see David Gergen smiling there in Dallas, and that's the difficulty. He has a tin ear. He just doesn't hear what the public is saying. And the difficulty is they want somebody who's going to level with them, and they want somebody that's going to give them a direction. He gives them neither. I mean, Ed Rollins' suggestion is the greatest. I doubt that the president can do that, and I doubt that he would be able to follow it for a month. I mean, remember, this was the State of the Union that was going to define the next 5 years. It didn't define the next week, let alone the next month. So I'm not sure how he's going to go up to Camp David and make that decision.
All right, let's talk about the Democrats, and we'll come back to some more general things. Mark, clearly it's Clinton and Tsongas in a two-man race.
It is a two-way race, although Jerry Brown is not going to go away. I mean, Jerry Brown is very much in it. I think Bob Kerrey is going to fold the tent tomorrow, and Tom Harkin's people are still talking in terms of geographical assessment that they've got. They've won more big states, Minnesota, Iowa, Idaho. It's an interesting angle.
Who was helped the most yesterday with their victories, Clinton or Tsongas?
I think the case could be made that both were helped.
Equally?
Tsongas had to win outside of New England. He did. He did do that by winning in Maryland. Clinton had to demonstrate support in his base. He did do that. And Bill Clinton assembled the outline. I think the profile of their two respective electorates is interesting. And Bill Clinton assembled for the first time, really since 1976, a biracial coalition of working class voters, both black and white. And Paul Tsongas, by contrast, is, if you're not an admirer of his, you'd say he's got the Brie and Chablis Democrats, whereas Clinton probably has the Muscatel and six-pack, or the Velveeta and six-pack Democrats. And Tsongas is getting high income, high education, postgraduate, reach to the suburbs, a reach to independents that Democrats haven't demonstrated in the past.
That they may need in November, but it doesn't help him a lot in primaries?
I think that's, well, it's more suburban, the electorate. I mean, here's Clinton, the Rhodes Scholar, and he's carrying high school graduates, I think, in Georgia yesterday by 4-1 margin.
Eddie Williams, how do you read the breakdown of yesterday in terms of who got helped the most, Tsongas or Clinton?
Well, I agree. I think they both were helped. I think it's interesting to see how that help came in terms of what are the implications for the next 2 weeks, where we might get some decisive primaries going to Super Tuesday, and then the week after that hitting Illinois and Michigan.
Explain it. What do you mean?
Well, in terms of who voted for whom, I think, for example, that that over the next 2 weeks, the black vote is going to have some significant centrifugal force on the primaries, particularly next week in 5 states, Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Texas, where the black vote is somewhere between 12 and 30% in each case, and where with a good turnout, and if things go the way they have been going, if Clinton pulling 70%
of the black
vote in Georgia and 49% in Maryland, then I think that would help his case considerably. But it's significant to note that that Tsongas in Maryland got some 32% of the black vote, and I think that is both good for Tsongas and good for the Democratic Party, and in a sense, good for Clinton. Because I think it is useful for Clinton not to be perceived as the black candidate or not to be perceived as the candidate of poor people. He also drew some, Clinton I think also drew some suburbanites and some upper income people in Maryland, whereas he didn't do as well in Georgia.
Yeah. David, David Gergen in Dallas, what's your overall reading of these results of yesterday in terms of the Democrats and how it sets up the race from here on using Eddie Williams' scenario?
Oh, I think both Eddie Williams and Mark were right. Their analysis was excellent. Bill Clinton has gained an enormous springboard for this Saturday in South Carolina. He's going to win that, I think, very handsomely. He's clearly going to sweep most of the southern states on Super Tuesday, this coming Tuesday. There is a race that's in the making in Florida between Clinton and Tsongas. Tsongas obviously helped himself by winning 3 states outside his region. But I would say that for both men, there's some fragility here. I think we have to note Tsongas was ahead in Colorado heading down the home stretch and then lost it there. He let it slip away from him on this nuclear power issue that Clinton went after him on. And even in Georgia, one of the striking things about Georgia, despite this huge Clinton win, it was a very substantial and impressive win. But it's notable that the turnout was pretty low in Georgia, Jim. It was a disappointing turnout. For the first time in history, I believe, there were more people who voted in the Republican primary in Georgia that were voted in the Democratic primary. George Bush, for all the problems we've talked about, gained 80,000 more votes than he did the last time around. So I was talking to Bert Lance earlier today. He said, you got to, in terms of the fall, in terms of November, while Clinton may look very strong against other Democrats right now, George Bush remains very strong in the South.
What about that word fragility, Peter Hart, that David just used in referring to both Tsongas and Clinton at this point?
Well, I think that there is some fragility. I would say that there are a lot of people looking and saying that, yes, Bill Clinton took a punch, but they want to know if there's any internal damage, and they aren't sure about that. And in terms of Paul Tsongas, he has a style and a manner which says, look, I'm leveling with you, I'm telling you what you have to do, and I think that works for him. But I think what David mentioned, some of the specifics are going to be examined over the course of the next weeks. The one thing I want to say is, they're talking about this race on the Democratic side as being a muddle. I see it as just the opposite. I see it as a drama. I mean, it is a marvelous race, and the voters are sorting out a lot of big issues and important ideas. And my sense is by the time that we get through the industrial Midwest states and then on into California, the Democrats are going to have come a long way towards putting themselves in a position to be competitive in the fall. And it's a lot different than the races that they've run in 1988 and 1984.
Well, I keep telling people that, too. This is one of the most interesting, both the Republican and the Democratic race was the most interesting we've had in a long time. You agree, Mark? You better.
Jim, if you said that, I was going to disagree with Peter, but I won't disagree with you. Peter's kind of the Clive Barnes of American politics. I'll tell you who doesn't think it's a great drama unfolding are office holders on both sides. I mean, there's an anxiety and a nervousness in the ranks. I was up on Capitol Hill today talking to Democrats who are really concerned on both sides. I mean, that question of Tsongas, is he going to be believable as a commander-in-chief? Is he so far out of sync with the rest of the Democratic Party and what it stood for? Bill Clinton, those questions, he's taken hits below the surface in a nautical metaphor. Has there been great damage done? Is there water taking on this vessel?
Ed Rollins, from a Republican point of view, I know this is a very difficult question, but that's the reason I'm going to ask it. Which one of these candidates, these Democrats, Tsongas or Clinton, looks more appetizing as somebody to run against?
Well, I'd be more than willing to run against either one of them, being perfectly honest. When 52% of the American public in the New York Times poll yesterday, Democrats say that they would like someone else to be in the field, it obviously tells you there's not great enthusiasm yet. And my personal feeling is that both of these men are really untested. There's a whole lot coming at them still. There's some serious questions about both Mr. Tsongas. Obviously, it's not just a health issue. It's an issue of really what does he stand for, and does he have the momentum in the organization that'll carry him beyond yesterday. Obviously, there's serious questions about Clinton and whether he'll be able to make the race without another allegation coming forward that cuts into his credibility. I think if the American public yesterday had their choice, the only one they would have left on the ballot would have been the president, with a question mark, small question mark after his name that have flushed the rest and started all over again. And I think the critical thing that we have to look at, this is going to come down an election in which voters are going to be one of three things. They're either going to be apathetic and not vote, which can be dangerous for everyone. They can be angry and turn out in record numbers and vote a whole lot of people out of office, including the incumbent in the White House, or it can be an election of hope. If it's an election of hope in which either the Democrats or the president offer a message for the future, then it can be a very positive election and one that George Bush can win.
Based on what's happened thus far, Ed, not just yesterday, but everything that's happened thus far, do you read more anger or more hope into the result?
I find total despair. I think voters out there today desperately are looking for leadership, and they don't see it in this field.
Eddie Williams?
I think they're looking for someone with some vision, and they don't see it in this field. I agree with you that this is an interesting race, but not always for the right reasons. It's interesting because
maybe interesting to cover.
Every candidate in there is wounded in some particular way. I think it is also interesting and should spur some national debate over what should be the criteria for people deciding whether to get in the race or not. A lot of people are thinking the best potential candidates are on the sidelines.
Isn't that an interesting thing, David Gergen, that what Eddie Williams just said, that all of these candidates are wounded in some way?
It's absolutely true, and it raises questions, of course, not only about the quality of the candidates, but again about the process. We have a process in which the parties, which are supposed to be nominating candidates, have precious little responsibility for essentially filtering through and finding the best people to run. It was Walter Mondale, of course, who's been a veteran of all of this and has been involved in some of the reforms, wrote a piece last week complaining that the parties really aren't doing the job of selecting the candidates that they should be doing. I hear more and more talk, Jim, from folks who say they'd like to go back to the smoke-filled rooms.
Yeah. But Peter Hart, somebody could say, hey, wait a minute. All human beings are wounded in some way, and there's no such thing as a perfect candidate. And
they are, but the answer is this field, and I think Ed Rollins is right, and that is that people are despairing. They want help. If they could say one thing to the candidates, it would be listen to us, level with us. My partner did a focus group, which put a series of people around a table and simply said to them, let us suppose that the President of the United States and your 2 United States senators are behind this one-way mirror. What would you do? And at that stage of the game, one woman, very prim woman in her 50s, turned and gave the bird to the window as a way of saying, this is how I feel. That's how much anger and how much frustration
And that's you see it in the Democratic race as well as the Republican race?
I think it's on both sides. And I mean, that's one of the things Pat Buchanan's tapping into, and obviously one of the things, it's the message of change that all Democrats are talking about.
Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Still ahead, a promising cancer treatment in short supply and killer asteroids. As we noted earlier, the actress Sandy Dennis died Monday after a long battle with ovarian cancer. Our next report is about promising efforts to treat cancers of the ovary, breast, and lung with a drug called Taxol. It's extracted from the Pacific yew tree and has shown impressive results in clinical trials. The trouble is the trees that produce Taxol are in very short supply in the Pacific Northwest. Correspondent Lee Hochberg of Oregon Public Broadcasting reports from Portland.
49-year-old Marcia Weidman is about to receive a remarkable new cancer drug.
You ready? I'm ready to get stuck. Now, Leslie, be careful or I'll have to swear. Fire. Oh, damn. Ooh. There, it's gone. It's okay now.
The pain from the needle is a small price to pay for a dose of the scarce experimental drug called Taxol. Last year, ovarian cancer killed 13,000 American women. Weidman and her doctor were sure she'd be one more.
I was going to die. I mean, I was just plain going to wait now and die because there wasn't anything else that we had for me. The biggest thing that went through my mind was now I'm going to get skinny and yellow and I'm going to be ugly and sick.
But Weidman got into a Taxol trial at the University of Washington. Only 3 months later, the tumors that had spread to her pelvis have shrunk dramatically.
One of my tumors is gone. I had one up here under my rib cage. They can't feel that anymore. Oh, it's a miracle. It's wonderful. I work full time. And my staff is glad to have me around. That's kind of a miracle too.
Other miracle stories are coming from the 1,700 patients being tested with Taxol nationwide. In ovarian cancer patients, 30% of those who'd failed 3 other types of chemotherapy are showing significant tumor reduction on Taxol. It's also being tested now on breast and lung cancers. University of Washington oncologist Joanna Kane.
The majority of people getting it are feeling better and doing better on a daily basis, without question.
Potentially, this could be one of the most exciting new drugs that we have been privileged to evaluate over the past decade.
The Bristol-Myers Squibb Company says it will begin distributing Taxol for treatment of ovarian cancer next year. That's the good news. The bad news is Taxol could be extremely difficult to get over the next few years. It comes from this tree, the Pacific yew, that grows predominantly on federal forests in the Pacific Northwest. For decades, loggers have clear-cut the commercially valuable Douglas firs of those forests, burning and wasting most of the yew in the process. Even after its cancer-fighting ability was discovered in the 1960s, loggers continued to burn yew as garbage. How many yews are left is unclear. Loggers insist Northwest forests are still rich with yew.
There is yew wood everywhere. It's there. It's everywhere. And I don't think we're ever going to run out of it.
But government estimates are much less optimistic, saying there won't be enough to provide Taxol for the nation's 21,000 new ovarian cancer patients every year. In a crash program to generate Taxol, collectors have peeled 800,000 pounds of yew bark, believed to be the most potent part of the tree. The bark goes to a facility in western Oregon where it's broken up and reduced to a sawdust-type material. Then Taxol is extracted. The National Cancer Institute says enough has been gathered to treat about 12,000 patients.
None of the bark's been taken off of this even.
Critics like Oregon environmentalist Wendell Wood say the life-saving yew bark is still being wasted, despite the increased awareness of its worth. As one agency of government, the Cancer Institute, races to gather it, loggers working on nearby federal land continue to mow it down.
This is what I'm picking up right here. I mean, when this is dried, we have at least a pound of bark. With this log, look at these snags. They were broken off here. There's another big tree down below. It's covered with bark. None of that has been collected. Right here, in just a spot, there's probably enough bark for one cancer patient, probably more than enough for one cancer patient.
In the late afternoon light in Oregon's Umpqua National Forest, Wood came upon the charred remains of yews recently burned in government logging operations.
Right in front of us there is a big, several hundred-year-old yew tree, and yet it was burned and destroyed. The Forest Service says they aren't burning this. Even when we told them not to burn it, they still burned it.
We admit that that we've had some, I call them minor mistakes. I don't think they're, we may have, we burned some units that we felt had, or we had heard had U in them. We went back and looked at them, and it really was, there was some U there, but it, you know, it's with a few stems, and that's about it.
Umpqua National Forest Supervisor Lee Kuntz says the Forest Service isn't wasting yew trees.
You cannot go out and find one tree or one unit and say, my God, look at the waste. My gut feeling is, I don't think we're endangering the species at all.
Well, I just am not willing to say that we're going to put the fate of cancer patients into some gut feeling on the part of somebody at one of these natural resources agencies.
At the request of Oregon Congressman Ron Wyden, the General Accounting Office is investigating federal management of the yew.
My staff went out last summer, and they found waste virtually everywhere they looked last summer.
The supply of Taxol may also be limited by a controversial agreement the government reached to produce the drug. It gave the Bristol-Myers Squibb Pharmaceutical Company the exclusive right to produce Taxol in the United States. The idea was to maximize production by marshaling the resources of the nation's second-largest pharmaceutical company. But critics say lack of competition has caused situations like this, where collectors peeled only the easy-to-reach bark, leaving the rest to rot. The president of the company Bristol-Myers hires to collect bark says he's trying to prevent inefficiency that could drive the price of Taxol out of reach of most patients.
We can't make people do a good job, apart from just saying, if you don't, you're not working with us anymore.
Bristol-Myers says the drug will be expensive no matter what.
We will continue to be reasonable and helpful to the oncology community. However, we will also continue to try to get a return on our huge investment that we've made in this product. Taxol will probably cost more than any other oncology product that's ever been developed.
Those of us with breast cancer, or might get breast cancer in the future, need whatever we can to fight it. It's vicious.
For the thousands of Americans fighting cancer, the knowledge that yew trees are being wasted is tormenting.
There is something out there that's available, in limited supply, but it's available, that's being wasted. Why can't I have it? I have 2 kids, one who's just turned 16, this one who's 7. I want to see them grown up. I hate mysteries that I don't find out the end to. And this is a mystery. What are they going to become?
Ro Bodrog's doctors consider her a wonder patient who's fought breast cancer for 10 years with radiation, chemotherapy, and surgery. Now they want her to take Taxol, but can't get any.
This last chemotherapy round that she went through using cisplatin was not the treatment I wanted to use. I would much rather have used Taxol. The chances of her responding to Taxol would have been greater.
Oncologist Harry Richardson now shares Bodrog's frustration.
And then you find out that the drug is not available because the resource is being wasted, then that doesn't make any sense.
In an ironic twist, the same foresters who for years have destroyed naturally growing yew in the forest now are racing to cultivate the plant in the nursery. The Weyerhaeuser Company has planted some 4 million yew tree seedlings in its Washington State greenhouse. Foresters believe they'll be able to extract Taxol from the young needles of the plants, as a European company has done, rather than waiting decades for appreciable amounts of bark.
We certainly are basing our program on the belief and hope that several parts of the plant, especially the needles, the tops and the shoots, will in fact have usable amounts of Taxol. I think this is our best shot at producing Taxol in the near to midterm.
Weyerhaeuser's Dick Peache predicts nursery-grown yew will satisfy a major part of the anticipated demand for Taxol within 3 to 4 years. Meanwhile, trying to create Taxol in a test tube has become the top priority for the nation's organic chemists.
These cultures do indeed produce Taxol. The amounts are at the moment minuscule, and so the challenge is now to get them to produce quantities that would be commercially interesting.
The University of Washington's Heinz Floss says a laboratory solution is still 5 to 10 years away. People like Ro Bodrag will need to keep defying the odds until science can provide what nature once delivered in abundance.
Congress today held 3 separate committee hearings on yew tree management. Yesterday, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which runs the Forest Service, announced that yew trees could be harvested only for Taxol production, and that burning yew trees would be permitted only if essential for reforestation. Up to now, only the tree's bark had been protected by federal regulation.
Finally tonight, a report on an issue that has not yet been debated on the campaign trail: what to do about killer asteroids. Correspondent Jeffrey Kay of public station KCET Los Angeles reports.
On cold, wintry nights at Palomar Mountain near San Diego, when most Southern Californians are sleeping, astronomer Eleanor Helene of NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab searches the night skies for asteroids which may be on a close encounter with Earth.
That looks good. How's our time? 15 seconds? 15? Okay, what is that? 5, 4, 3. Open.
Helene's hunt has been going on since 1973.
I think the work is looked upon with much more respect than perhaps it was 20 years ago.
And how was it regarded then?
I suppose it was considered like, why are these people spending their professional life looking for and chasing, flying rocks? And I think perhaps some of my colleagues have even said as much in those words.
Behind your back. Or maybe not behind your back.
A little bit of both. A little bit of both.
Scientists such as Helene and Dr. Clark Chapman of the Planetary Institute in Tucson, Arizona, say the search for so-called Earth-crossing asteroids is more than a quixotic quest.
Well, by the raw Las Vegas odds, the risk of death from an asteroid is about the same as the risk of death from an airliner crash for an average American.
Earth-bound asteroids are not an everyday, every year, or even an every century occurrence, but they do approach and sometimes strike our planet. In 1989, an asteroid half a mile wide crossed Earth's orbit only 6 hours before Earth reached the same point. If there had been a collision, it would have produced an explosion equal to 1,001 megaton bombs going off. In 1972, a tourist's movie camera shot this incredible footage of an asteroid streaking across the western Rockies. It skipped out of the atmosphere, never hitting Earth.
Now, how big was the asteroid that hit here?
About 150 feet in diameter. It was a little one. That's a little asteroid.
Dr. Eugene Shoemaker of the U.S. Geological Survey has spent his life looking for craters on Earth caused by asteroid impacts. He's identified more than 130 of them, including Meteor Crater outside Flagstaff, Arizona. This hole in the ground is almost a mile wide and 600 feet deep. It was created some 50,000 years ago by a meteor, which is a fragment of an asteroid.
Is this something that we need to be thinking about and worrying about, as if there aren't enough things to worry about?
Well, I wouldn't worry about a crater the size of Meteor Crater, Arizona. After all, the effects of this crater, the severe effects on living things, was limited to a distance of maybe 20 miles or so in radius around this crater. What one should worry about, perhaps, would be much larger craters, craters that would be 10 or 20 or 30 times the size of this.
It was an asteroid measuring about 6 miles across that many scientists now believe led to the extinction of these beasts, dinosaurs, which were wiped out 65 million years ago. After years of searching, scientists now think they found the culprit, or at least evidence of it, a crater 110 miles wide in and around Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. The impact of the asteroid resulted in an explosion equal in force to all the nuclear bombs in the world going off at once.
First of all, so much dust is thrown up in the atmosphere, it just makes the surface of the Earth utterly dark for a period of time that's probably the order of a few months. So you just shut off the sunlight to the surface of the Earth.
The result was an ecological holocaust. Without light and heat, plants soon died. So did the animal species which fed on them.
It was an ecological open space for new species to occupy, and there was a burst of evolution. In fact, there was a burst of evolution of mammals. In a certain sense, that's why you and I are here to talk about it today, because we're part of, human beings, of course, ultimately evolved out of that burst of mammalian evolution that started at that time.
It's a 2-hour position, plus 25 degrees rough. Well, it's more than that, plus 28 or so.
But the life forms which began with an asteroid collision could end the same way. An asteroid could wipe out humankind as easily as it did the dinosaurs. Such notions drive people like Eleanor Helene to keep up their vigil.
Pull it out.
She scans the night skies using an antiquated 18-inch telescope. But even with this outdated technology, Helene, who learned her craft from Dr. Shoemaker, has done some pioneering work.
We have found over the last 20 years a great number of near-Earth asteroids and comets. When I started, there were just virtually a dozen and a half that were known.
How many have you discovered?
My program has been responsible for between 55 and 60 near-Earth asteroid discoveries, and a complement of comets of about a dozen.
In fact, Helene discovered one asteroid the night before we arrived.
In this instance, it appears to be new as far as we're concerned. Obviously, we'll go on and follow it tonight. So yes, the moment of discovery, like in all things, it perhaps keeps us going.
Helene and others find asteroids by comparing timed exposures.
If we were to take a snapshot of the sky, it would look just like a star. But because we're taking time exposures, we see the motion during a time exposure. So we will see this object move from place to place over the night, and hence it's a moving star.
Little is known about the composition of these moving stars, but scientists do know where they come from, a place they call the asteroid belt.
There's a big gap between Mars and Jupiter, where a planet might have formed but failed to form, and that's where the asteroid belt is. The stuff that might have made a planet out there still is in small pieces and colliding and crashing around.
One of those pieces is named Gaspra, photographed this fall when the spacecraft Galileo ventured into the asteroid belt. When objects like Gaspra bump into each other, the collisions can produce asteroids with Earth-crossing orbits, irregular trajectories that can cross with Earth's. There are, in fact, thousands of these large Earth-crossing asteroids. Unfortunately, the asteroid hunters have found and tracked only about 100 of them.
But the rate at which we're doing this at the present time, collectively, all of us that are working on it around the world now, is such that it would be a couple of centuries or more before all of the objects larger than, say, half a mile across were found. And those are the size objects that we're ones really concerned about, things that might produce catastrophic effects globally.
Such concerns have struck a nerve in Washington with politicians, perhaps worried that Earth-crossing asteroids might mess up their careers. After the asteroid almost hit Earth in 1989, the U.S. Congress became alarmed enough to establish 2 scientific committees to investigate asteroids. One committee is developing a plan to destroy incoming asteroids, the other, better ways of discovering and tracking them. One of the members of that committee is Clark Chapman.
The committee that was assigned the task of trying to figure out how we could detect these objects more completely has proposed an international program involving the building of 6 quite large telescopes that could produce an inventory, a census, if you will, of essentially all of the objects larger than half a mile in diameter. At the moment, we only know of a few percent of these objects, but within 20 years, using this international network of telescopes, we could probably find 95% of them.
The cost for this endeavor would be around $100 million.
I think it's worth investing the effort just as a matter of insurance. I think it would be a matter of prudence to mount the effort to find those objects.
NASA's Dr. John Rather heads the committee that is recommending ways of countering an asteroid threat.
If we were confronted with a short-term phenomenon, something that we didn't know was there until the last few days, then the probability of our being able to do something about it is zero.
Some scientists, including Edward Teller, the physicist who invented the hydrogen bomb and who sold President Reagan on Star Wars, are advancing the notion that Star Wars technology could be redeployed against asteroids. SDI's early warning system would allow scientists to detect an asteroid hundreds of millions of miles away and then help target a missile to destroy it.
If eventually we do reprogram our nuclear missiles, keep a few of them around to destroy the one that's going to come in and deal the coup de grace, we will have to have some sort of terminal guidance system, an acquisition system, a guidance system, exactly the same sort of thing that people were familiar with in the Patriot. You know, it would see the rocket coming and then it would launch the Patriot to intercept, and it would guide it with radar so it would strike the rocket. Well, we have to perform exactly the same functions in dealing with an asteroid if we're going to try to destroy it or deflect it. And there's even been a collaboration or protocol between NASA and the Strategic Defense Initiative Organization the past year to look at technologies that may have common impact both places.
But asteroid hunters like Chapman, Helene, and Shoemaker believe exotic schemes to destroy asteroids should be a low priority.
You know, what we would think about doing now would be quite different than what we would think about doing 50 years from now. And so it's really kind of jumping the gun, in my opinion, to rush out and develop some means for shooting these things down or blowing them up. We should really do the search and see if there's a problem to be addressed.
This is what, about a 6.5 magnitude star?
Later this year, Congress will get reports from both committees and budgets on the costs of each approach. Then it will decide whether or not finding and destroying asteroids is something the U.S. Congress should be doing and the U.S. taxpayer underwriting. In the interim, all we can do is keep our fingers crossed that there's not an asteroid out there with Earth's name on it.
The political fallout from a series of key primaries and caucuses was the major story of this Wednesday. President Bush said he was happy with his victories despite another big protest vote for Pat Buchanan. The White House scoffed at Buchanan's call for Mr. Bush to drop out of the race. No clear frontrunner emerged in the Democratic race, but Bob Kerry's poor showing put his candidacy in question. He canceled his campaign appearances and scheduled an announcement for tomorrow.